Hey folks, welcome back to another episode on the journey to searing the perfect steak in cast iron. Today what we're going to test is whether the regular approach of just searing a steak from the outset in cast iron is better than doing a reverse sear. So for the reverse sear, we're going to first bring our steak almost up to its finishing temp on the Traeger using indirect heat, and then we're going to give it a finishing sear right in the cast iron. So we're going to see what's better, getting all that buttery garlic and rosemary through the whole cook, or whether that smokiness that we're gonna get on the Traeger, doing a bit of indirect cooking at the outset and then combining it with a little bit of butter, garlic, rosemary at the end, which of those has the better flavor profile, the better crust, and the overall better outcome. So stick around. So first step, as always, is just gonna be to dab the surface of our steaks nice and dry. So just use a little bit of paper towel for that. As always, you want to be starting with high quality beef. Here we've got prime. Less than 2% of America's meat is prime grade. So you always want to be starting with that. Perfect. Now that we've got the surfaces dried down, we're just going to add our seasoning. We'll go in with a little bit of fleur de sel. Pack that down in there. Do the same on this steak. Now we don't have time for the full dry brine, so we're just going to go ahead, add some freshly ground black pepper to this. Pack all this in, flip the steaks over. We'll do the same on the other side. Add in our fresh black pepper. All right, now with all that excess that's on the board, make sure you get the edges of your steak. All right, so we're just gonna let these sit and have that seasoning absorb into the steak for at least an hour here. In the meantime, we're just gonna prep the Traeger and our grill to go on to the next stage of this test. All right, so for the indirect cook, we're gonna be doing that on the Traeger here. We're gonna set the internal temp of the Traeger unit to 275, and we're gonna be using hickory pellets on the Traeger. We're gonna use the meat probes to monitor the internal temp of the steak, and we're gonna wanna take it up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit before we remove it from indirect heat and bring it over to the pan for that final sear. And that final sear should bring the internal temp up to about 128, 130, where it'll be a perfect medium rare. So let's get this bad boy fired up. All right, we've got the Traeger up to temp. It's almost sitting at 275. So we're gonna get one of these bad boys on. These have been sitting for an hour. So we're gonna get our indirect sear steak going. So what we're gonna do, drop this down in here, and we're gonna feed our meat probe through this little hole that's built into the side. And then we're gonna stick it in the thickest part of the steak. All the way down just like that, so that the tip of the meat probes in and around the center of the steak. This kind of indirect cooking is perfect when you're doing thicker cuts and you want a more even level of doneness throughout the entire steak. You know, as opposed to getting the gray edges along the outside, this should result in a perfect medium rare all the way through from one end to the other. So we'll see if that's the final outcome. If you're doing a really thick porterhouse or a really thick tomahawk, go indirect. It's absolutely going to give you the best result if you're not doing something like sous vide. So we're just going to do this outside on the grill. We've got the burners underneath the pan lit up here. So we're just going to close the lid and let this heat up to about 400, 450 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've had the cast iron pan warming up here. Now we want to make sure we've got a temp of at least 400 degrees, and we do. So now we're just going to add avocado oil. Again, avocado oil has a high smoke point, so that's why we're using it. We're just going to move the oil around the pan. Make sure we get a nice coating all over. Perfect, just like that. Now we're going to toss in our steak. Now we're gonna close the lid down, leave this here for 4 minutes before we flip it. All right, so we're at the 4-minute mark. So we're gonna flip our steak. We're now gonna add the butter as well. Gonna add a little bit of rosemary. And we're getting ready to add the indirect steak over here when we've got 2 minutes left in the cook. And we've got garlics that we've just smashed with our hands, so you've opened them up a little bit, but we haven't chopped them or anything like that. So let's give this another 2 minutes. All right, so our internal temp just hit 120. So we're gonna turn this off, fire up the cast iron, and get this ready to sear. So with 2 minutes left in the cook, we're gonna put down the steak that was done indirect on the Traeger. Give this a 1 minute sear on each side. At the 1 minute mark, we're gonna flip that indirect steak. Now, let's baste these a little bit in the butter. Close that back down. So final temperature check here. 128. 126. All right, so let's pull these steaks, get them inside to rest. All right, we've got the steaks indoors. The one that was done in the pan the whole time is here on the left. The one that was done in the smoker indirect first is here on the right. You can certainly see first impressions. This one has that reddish hue from the smoking, as you'd expect. Because we didn't have time to do the dry brine, you can see the crust here. We're as good as some of the crusts we've got on some of our other videos. So we're not gonna tent these. We know tenting isn't the way to go from one of our earlier tests. So we're just gonna let these rest with a little bit of butter on them, and we'll dig in here in a few minutes and see which one has a more even doneness. The taste, the texture profile will reveal it all. All right, we've had these resting for 10 minutes and I can hardly withstand not digging into these because of the smell. So why don't we slice in and see how these turned out. All right, now for the one that was done indirect. Perfect, so let's take a slice here from the middle and compare from the two steaks. So the overall level of doneness, we've got medium rare on the inside. There's still that gray piece on the edges, as you'd probably expect from the sear at the end. What we've got here, this is the one that was done just in the cast iron the whole time. It actually looks like it achieved a better medium rare on the inside, and we still have that same kind of gray ring that goes around the outside of the steak. So overall, actually not that much difference in terms of the level of evenness of the cook all the way through. The steak that was done on cast iron for the entire 8-minute cook, that definitely has more of a crust relative to the one that was done indirect. But visually, I just really like the redness that the indirect one gives. Now, let's actually dig in here for a taste test. Super tender. You can taste the smoky flavor that was embedded within that steak as it was cooking indirect. Really, really good. Let's try the fat cap. Yep, super soft, just melts in your mouth. Really, really good outcome there. Now, let's try the steak that was done in the pan for the entire cook. This one tastes a little bit chewier, to be honest, but you're still getting that really rich butter, rosemary, garlic flavor here that we weren't quite getting on the indirect smoke. So why don't I take one last bite here just of the fat cap and see how that turned out. Yep, they're still done, you know, same as the other one. Fat cap's nice and smooth, melts away in your mouth. You don't have to worry about any rubberiness there. Perfect. So I think overall, this one's really just gonna come down to personal preference. This steak certainly had the more butterier garlic rosemary taste. This one, while that was still present, it was just a little bit less so. And it came instead with more of a smoky flavor. The richness of that hickory on the Traeger really came through. So it's really over to you folks. What do you prefer? Garlic, rosemary, and butter versus that hickory smoke. You decide and you can pick the winner. So if you like this video, give us a like below. We'd love to hear your comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for tuning in.